people, no worries. Just what the doctor ordered. Right, doctor?
I remember that morning, and in fact, I can never forget that morning. It was a terrifying morning. We were at the front window, just gazing out. And suddenly we saw two soldiers marching up the driveway, carrying rifles with shiny bayonets. They stomped up the front porch and with their fists began pounding on the door. We were ordered out of our home at gunpoint. And my mother was the last to come out, and she had tears rolling down her cheek. This was a concentration camp. We were all concentrated, densely concentrated. We happened to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor and put in prison camps simply because of our race. I consider it my responsibility as an American citizen to actively participate, particularly because I know my childhood imprisonment. If we don't educate our fellow Americans to the vulnerability of our democracy, how fragile it can be, then we're not being responsible citizens.
Thank you very much for that. Oh my greeting.
Oh my, indeed, George. So in this video, you talked about responsibility. Tell me more.
Well, I think that sense comes to me from the time I was in my teens. We were incarcerated when I was 5 years old, and we were released when I was 8.5, the duration of the war. And as I became a teenager, I wanted to understand more about our incarceration. And most Japanese Americans say that their parents didn't talk about the internment to them. My father, I realize now, was a very unusual man. He did share with me over or after dinner what he felt, what he saw, and he shared with me some of his pain and anguish. He said when he saw his 3 kids, I was the oldest, my brother was a year younger, and my baby sister was an infant when we were imprisoned. And he saw the barbed wire fence and us, and it made him feel so helpless. He wondered what kind of future are his children going to have, and he had dreams and aspirations for us. But now, with us behind barbed wire fence, what kind of future will his children have? And so he shared the internment experience with me, but at the and I challenged him. Why did you go, Daddy? Why didn't you resist? And he said, our government is a democracy, a people's democracy. And he quoted Abraham Lincoln, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's the strength of the government, this democratic government, but it is as fragile as the people are, because people are fallible human beings. He said Roosevelt was a great president during the 1930s. He did amazing things to pull the country up from that crushing depression. But after Pearl Harbor, when war hysteria and racism swept across the country, the entire nation was swept up. And even the president, this great president, got stampeded. It happened to us because we were not participants in the process. And he encouraged my brother and me to be active in student government. And I suspect now that he was a sexist because he didn't urge my sister to be active in student government, just my brother and me. And I served as student body president and in various other student government areas. But I maintained that after dinner conversation with him, and I kept challenging him that, you could have resisted. And he said, you're our hope. And one Sunday afternoon, he drove me downtown to the Adlai Stevenson for President campaign headquarters. And that is where I understood what my father was talking about. And at the same time, it was a lot of fun. Political activism, you're there with all these other people, and there's excitement and drama, and being a theater lover, that excited me too. And I understood what it required to be active in our people's democracy. And I didn't have the franchise yet. I wasn't of age. But when I became of age, I registered. My father was a Democrat. And I was pretty much an individualistic kid already. I didn't want to be a clone of my father. So I registered as a decline to state. I was not going to be just like my father. I was active in, I'm going to be active in public affairs, but I am not going to be a clone. But then I later, after the Adlai Stevenson races, I became active in a senatorial campaign, U.S. Senate from California, George Brown, the only man who voted against the Vietnam War budget. And so I became a volunteer in that campaign. It was the primaries. I discovered I couldn't vote for Congressman Brown because I wasn't a Democrat. I told my father I became a Democrat, and he did not rib me about it. I'm eternally grateful for that.
Oh, these after-dinner conversations with your father, there were many of them. And it sounds like some of them were revealing, that you were trying to understand your father's actions in order to maybe make your own decisions about your place in America. Can you tell me more?
Well, my father was born in Japan, but he was, his mother, my grandmother, died when he was very young. And my widower grandfather decided to start life anew in America with his two boys. My father was the younger of the two. And so he brought his two sons to San Francisco. And my father grew up, was educated, went to college in San Francisco. And he always called himself a San Franciscan. But by birth, he was a Japanese citizen. At that time, all Asian immigrants to the United States were ineligible to become naturalized citizen. The only immigrant group that was denied naturalized citizenship were immigrants from Asia. And they had other follow-up laws in California, Oregon, and Washington, which denied land ownership to, they didn't use the word Asian, aliens ineligible to citizenship could not buy land, and that meant Asians. My maternal grandparents came to the Sacramento Delta, and they were farmers. My paternal grandfather was a journalist for the Japanese press. My maternal grandparents were farmers in the Sacramento Delta, but my grandfather could not buy the land he developed. It was scrap land that he turned into bountiful, productive farmland. But my mother's father was a wily guy. He found a way to get around the land ownership ban for Japanese immigrants. My uncle was the firstborn son. He was born in the United States. He was an American citizen. So my uncle, as a child, was the landowner. My grandfather farmed the land of his baby boy. But it was that kind of subterfuge by which we had to find our place in America. So my father believed in the importance of our becoming participants, taking on responsibility of citizenship as Americans. And that's why he urged my brother and me to be active in the political arena.
Yeah, and this participatory democracy is so significant for your family and yourself. And you were in politics for a bit. I'm curious about you as an actor and you as your interest in politics.
Well, my mother used to say, she knew in the maternity ward that she was saddled with a ham when she heard that stentorian yowl. And I still remember when I was a kid and my parents would have guests, I would come bouncing out and say, I learned Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Would you like me to perform it for you with all the guests? So I had that in my blood. But after the war, my father did many things. Our first home after the war was on Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles because the government had taken everything from us. We were only given $25 and a one-way ticket to wherever in the United States we wanted to go to, and my parents decided to go back to Los Angeles. Our first home was on Skid Row. My father was a block manager in both of the camps that we were in, and although that job was over because we were back in Los Angeles, the people still looked to him for advice and guidance and assistance, and they came to him for help in finding a job. So my father opened up an employment agency in Little Tokyo, the Japanese American community in downtown LA, and he helped people get jobs, but they were all jobs that paid a pittance, dishwasher, janitor, gardener. Those were the only jobs that were available.
Yeah, and I understand he did this voluntarily because
That's right.
they couldn't pay him.
It was almost a pro bono effort, but he got a small percentage, but a percentage of a pittance wasn't too much. And my mother made him quit that, and he bought a dry cleaning shop in East LA, built up the business and sold it, and then he bought a grocery store in the African-American neighborhood in South Central, built that business up and sold it, and then he went into, good timing, into real estate when other Japanese-American families were getting back on their feet, and he sold homes and businesses. And I think my father had the dream of putting out a sign that said, Takei and Son Real Estate Development. He urged me to study architecture. And so like a good son, I started out my college studies up at Berkeley as an architecture student. But after 2 years, and I was getting good grades, but the fire was burning hotter and hotter in my belly, as they say. And I decided to have that man-to-man talk with my father, came back down to Los Angeles and said, Daddy, I've got to be true to myself. I want to give myself that opportunity to at least test my wings. I want to go to New York and study at the Actors Studio, where all the great ones were coming from. Marlon Brando, James Dean, Montgomery Clift. I want to study there. My father knew me well enough to be prepared with a deal. He said, yes, I know that the Actors Studio is a fine, respected acting school, but when you finish there, they won't give you a diploma. It's not that kind of school. Your mother and I want you to have at least a diploma. But you're a bullheaded kid. You're going to insist on going to New York and studying at the Actors Studio. So let me remind you, New York is a crowded place, a competitive place, and a very expensive place. And you'll have to be ready to and prepared to do it all on your own. However, here in town in Los Angeles, there's a fine theater school at the UCLA University. And when you should finish there, they will give you that parchment, that documentation that your mother and I want from you. If you go to New York, you do it all on your own, but if you go to UCLA, we'll subsidize you. I discovered that I was a practical kid. I went with the subsidy.
That's so great. And while you were at UCLA, you were in a show called Fly Blackbird?
It was after UCLA.
Oh, okay.
It was a civil rights musical. And we became a great hit. We played for 11 months. A bunch of college kids in the civil rights movement. And I was the only Asian kid there.
What?
And there was one song number that mocked the stereotype of the gong always accompanying an Asian character in movies. It was called the Gong Song. And so we became a hit in Los Angeles. And that means you played for 11 months.
Wow.
And a off-Broadway producer came and bought the rights to it and said to the Los Angeles cast, I can't promise you anything, but if you come to New York and audition with the others, you have a good chance of getting cast. You have a leg up. So we'll urge you to come to New York. And so for the first time in my life, I went to New York. It was in early December in 1960. I'm a Southern Californian kid. I didn't know how cold was, cold was, until I went to New York. But December is wonderful. The decorations are up, the air is filled with Christmas carols, and people are, and you literally can smell chestnuts roasting over an open fire on the sidewalk. It was a magical but cold place. About 17 of us from Los Angeles went to New York. We became a tribe, and we all auditioned, and on the night of the announcement, we all gathered in, I was sharing a flat, a one-room, they call it an apartment, but it was just one big room with two other cast members from Fly Blackbird. And we all gathered at our apartment that night and waited for the composer-lyricist who was with the production company. And he said he'd be with us by around 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock came, he didn't show. 9:30, no Jackson was his name. And 10:30, he finally appeared. And he had a long face. We discovered only one of us out of 17 from Los Angeles got cast. And I thought, I'm the one.
Were you?
But 16 others thought they're the one. It turned out I wasn't the one. Only one of us. And of all people, he happened to be one of my roommates. Insult upon injury. The guy that was cast was the guy who was with us in the same apartment. It was devastating. And January came, and I never knew that January can be such a horrible month. Gray slush at the intersections, bone-chilling cold, and unemployed.
Oh dear. How do you deal with devastation?
Well, we had to find a job somehow. I got a job selling ties at B. Altman's, a department store that no longer exists. I think some of you people in Connecticut might recognize B. Altman. And my husband's name is Brad Altman. That was his bachelor name. He now has changed his name to Brad Takei. But I tell him that when I was devastated in New York, I sold ties at your store, B. Altman. But then Christmas was over, and I was unemployed again. And the next job I had was on Long Island City. Today, it's a yuppie apartment complex, beautiful, glassy high-rise apartment towers. But back then, it was a warehouse area. I got a job loading and unloading trucks at Long Island City. And my glove was a cotton glove. My hands were numb out in the cold. So I did the classic actor's thing of being in New York in the wintertime, unemployed, doing whatever job was available. So I appreciate being employed now, especially in the wintertime in New York.
Speaking about hands, you've shaken the hands of quite a number of important people. In line with Fly Blackbird, you shook the hand of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Tell me about that.
I did. During the 11 months that we played in Los Angeles, we sang at almost every civil rights rally all over LA County. And the biggest civil rights rally was at the Los Angeles Sports Arena that held tens of thousands of people. And the keynote speaker was to be Dr. Martin Luther King. And just that idea of singing at his rally was a thrilling thought. And we got to march in together with Dr. King into the arena that was cheering, and we sang our hearts out. Fly Blackbird, Wake Up, the Dawn is Coming, all those songs, cheering songs. And then Dr. King spoke, and that eloquent baritone of his, that he, with those soaring metaphors, had our spirits way up in the rafters. And it was such a thrill. But the biggest thrill of all was after the rally, they gathered us all together and said, they're going to usher us downstairs to Dr. King's dressing room, and we will all get to meet him. And the entire cast of Fly Blackbird was herded down to the basement dressing room area, and we got a chance to chat with him briefly and shake his hand. And this hand that shook his didn't get washed for about 3 days.
Now I think many people would say that you're the person they would want to shake hands with, and that you have the mellifluous baritone voice.
People have told me that they didn't wash their hands for 3 days after shaking my hand.
I want to turn back to B. Altman, to Brad. And how many years have you been together?
This year makes it 34.
34. 34. Yes. Yes. And in line with marches and parades, can you tell me a bit about LGBTQ rights organizing, maybe a coming out story?
Well,
You came out fairly late.
It
Whatever
took a
you
long
want to talk
time
about.
for me to get to that point of organizing and advocating. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, in junior high school, there was a growing realization that I'm different in ways other than just my Japanese face. I was always mindful that, this face got us imprisoned. But I was different in another way because there was a classmate of ours, her name was Monica, nice girl, but she was prematurely blossoming forth in full womanhood. And the other guys would say, "Wow, Monica's hot. Look at those bazooms," I thought Monica was nice. I liked her. But I didn't know why they were getting so excited. But to be completely honest, it was Bobby that I thought was so cute. I was different. And I didn't like being different because we were imprisoned for being different. And being adept at play acting, I acted like the other guys so I could be like them. I said, "Wow, Monica's hot." Yeah, And when they started dating, I dated too because I wanted to be like them. And when my buddy wanted to double date, I double dated with them. But again, to be honest, I was more interested in my buddy than in my date. So I grew up feeling not only different, but constrained. And then later I discovered that I wasn't alone in feeling this way. There are others. And then through them I discovered gay bars. And at long last, I could put down the facade, relax, and feel free with the people in that bar and enjoying a bottle of beer. But then one of the older people said to me, even in a gay bar, we had to be careful because they raided gay bars and took the people out of the gay bar, put them on a paddy wagon, drove them downtown to the police station, and fingerprinted them and took their picture. I mean, that was terrifying. If any of that got out, it would kill them. They would lose their jobs, their careers. And by this time, I was pursuing an acting career. And so even in a gay bar, we had to be careful. And certainly, if I'm going to pursue an acting career, I could not be seen to be one of those. And it was a very painful, suffocating feeling. And then we heard about the Stonewall Rebellion in New York, a gay bar that got raided, and the people resisted. And they started throwing beer bottles at the police. And then they retreated and called for reinforcements. And that rebellion went on for 4 days and 4 nights. And that was the beginning of what was called the gay liberation movement. I've been active in the civil rights movement and in the peace movement during the Vietnam War and the movement to get an apology and redress for our incarceration during the Second World War. I was an activist. And yet, the thing that was most personal to me, closest to me, I was silent on. And the sense of guilt. Here are all these people sacrificing their lives and their careers and everything. Some even lost their families. And I'm protecting my career. And that saddles you with this horrible sense of guilt. But at the same time, there's fear. Friends are suddenly getting sick and drastically losing their weight, becoming skeletal. And before you know it, they're gone. Friends of yours. I'm gay. Maybe that's going to happen to me. It was a terrifying period. And to be silent when others are actively advocating burdens you with that fear and compounded with guilt. And the only way I could participate was with my checkbook, which was such an anemic way of doing it. But that's what we did. And by that time, I was together with Brad, and we both got tested, and thank God we were negative. And then the AIDS marches began, and we marched as allies, which, again, you feel very awkward and uncomfortable about because we weren't allies. We were marching for ourselves. But because of the activists' work, things were starting to happen. In 2003, Massachusetts got marriage equality through the courts. But 2 years later, in California, all the way across the country, and not through the courts, the California state legislature, both the Senate and the Assembly, passed the marriage equality bill. I did not participate in that because the other activists brought that about. But we were overjoyed. We are going to get a bookend type of situation, Massachusetts and California. It needed one more signature, that of the governor, who happened to be a movie star, Arnold Schwarzenegger. When he campaigned for the governor's seat, he campaigned by saying, I'm from Hollywood. I've worked with gays and lesbians. Some of my best friends, you know, the whole song and dance. We thought surely with that kind of campaign, he's going to sign the bill. But when the bill landed on his desk, he played to his right-wing Republican base and vetoed it. And we were raging. But Brad and I were back home watching the late night news, and we saw that the governor's veto come on, and we saw young people pouring out onto Santa Monica Boulevard, venting their rage against Schwarzenegger, and we felt the same way, but we were comfortably at home. And we started talking about participating, and we decided it's time. And I spoke to the press for the first time as a gay man and blasted Schwarzenegger's veto. And from then on, we partnered with the Human Rights Campaign and went on a nationwide speaking tour.
Fantastic. It's amazing. It's amazing how quickly half an hour goes. Our half an hour is at its end. Is there one closing, how to have strength, how to participate in democracy, and then you get your award?
Well, this is the year 2020, the year that we saw the United States Senate, half of the Senate, all of the Republican senators becoming zombies in a people's democracy. Something as unbelievable as that. Only one had the guts and integrity to speak out. That is courage. Mitt Romney. And even at that, he hedged it. It wasn't two no's, a yes and a no, but he stood against them. And that underscores the importance of our active participation. It affects our lives. My book, They Called Us Enemy, is a graphic memoir. Yes, and it's targeting the youth readership, because I remember when I was a teenager, I loved comic books, and at that age, you've got your pores open and you're just absorbing in information that stays with you throughout your life. And so we did it as a graphic memoir so that we can reach young Americans at this very active age of storing up information, because they're going to be the voters of tomorrow and the movers and shakers of tomorrow. And it is vitally important that we all participate. It's going to be a tough, they're saying all these Democrat candidates are poll-wise going to beat Trump. I don't believe that, because in 2016, I thought surely Hillary was the winner. I was shell-shocked for a week after that result. I couldn't believe that Donald Trump had won. And so we've got to give it our all, and particularly to urge young people who are now of voting age to get registered and vote. 2020 is a critically important year for our democracy.
Yes, thank you so much, George Takei. Thank you.